Welcome everybody to this logistics update presented by Apex Logistics International. I'm Andrew Cox, research analyst here at FreightWaves, and today I get the pleasure of speaking with Michael Piza, Senior Vice President of Corporate Business Development at Apex Logistics International. Michael, thanks for joining me.
Andrew, thanks so much for having me. I've been following a lot of stuff FreightWaves has been doing, and a lot of it's very neat. So thanks a lot for having me today.
Thank you, sir. Let's talk about some of the different modes of transportation. Every mode has been affected at some point and in some way by the coronavirus this year. But let's focus on two of Apex's larger business segments. That's international ocean and air freight. What are some of the changes you've seen in those two segments so far this year?
Yeah, both the international air and ocean markets have been very dynamic this year. Let's talk about the air freight first. First on the international air side, the capacity has decreased 25% globally this year, but the demand has not shrunk that much. So you're seeing an imbalance between demand and capacity that everyone's trying to fight through. I think one thing we saw is with all the passenger airlines coming out of the market, that it became the year of the freighter aircraft. If you had access to freighters, you were able to move cargo more freely. The demand is really driven by a couple of different factors, right? There was a huge spike in the PPE products back in April, May, June timeframe. We're still seeing some PPE today. And then some of the markets have done very well, like the tech business. Everyone needed to stock up on tech products, so they continue to fly at very large volumes. And you've seen other sectors do very well too, home furnishings and things of that nature, people fixing up their homes and things like that. I think there's a lot of different drivers, e-commerce being a real key driver to the international air freight markets. There's a lot of cross-border e-commerce traffic going today. That was something that was happening in the past, but I think it really got accelerated as a result of the pandemic, that people were shopping online, buying from foreign markets, and it's taking up a huge chunk of air capacity that I think people are adjusting to today. And then the international ocean market's really dynamic this year too. I mean, the ocean rates right now are at 10-year highs, which was a little bit unexpected, I think, coming into 2020. The pandemic hit right around ocean contract season. So I think what you saw is a lot of uncertainty going into ocean contract season. You don't know how the pandemic's going to play out, how much capacity you need. Let's say the shippers don't know how much capacity they might need at that time with all the uncertainty out there. So, I think the market, the ocean market's been very dynamic, and you saw a lot of ocean consolidations on the ocean carrier side, right? You had a merger between CMA and APL, and then you also had, you've had different shifts in the market that way too. So I think those trends are going to continue, and the demand on the ocean side is also at a very high level. I mean, we're seeing bottlenecks at origin for equipment. For example, certain carriers don't have 40-foot high cube containers at origin, so you're seeing some bottlenecks there on the front end. You're seeing some bottlenecks on the back end here when it arrives to the U.S., for example, in North America. The terminals are a little bit overwhelmed with all the volume and things like that. So, it's been a dynamic and a challenge, and I think a struggle that everyone's trying to kind of fight through here in 2020.
Michael, our sonar data would definitely agree with you. The ports are a mess, especially on the West Coast. They're backed up on every level, from space on the containers coming in, to port space, to warehouse space, to intermodal space. It's all very tight right now. I know you said that you expect some of these trends to continue, but let's expand the time frame a little bit. Moving into 2021, do you expect these trends to continue? How does a vaccine and maybe a normalization of our service spending affect some of this demand for air and ocean international freight?
Sure. On the air freight side, I just don't see the passenger aircrafts coming back that quickly, even with the vaccine. So I think that this air trend with limited capacity and high demand, it should continue through 2021. And I know there's a lot of discussion out there on a global front, how the vaccine is going to affect the cargo markets. Obviously, everyone's going to be rushing to put those vaccines in the air and get them to destinations to help people. So I think we have to keep our eye on how that's going to affect the air markets. So I anticipate this air freight market to continue like this all through 2021. On the ocean side, I'll be really curious what happens in the contract season coming up in 2021, because I think we've got to get a better balance on the rates. There's been a lot of volatility in the rates and in capacity as well. The ocean carriers have been blanking a lot of sailings, so they're trying to kind of control that capacity. I think there's a lot of uncertainty for them, right? That's a very expensive asset that they've got to make sure that they're in control of, and So, the ocean is a little bit harder for me to foresee in the future.
Michael, let's talk about technology here for a moment. What are some of the major technological advancements being made in international cargo?
Right. There's a lot of great stuff on the technology side. I love it. I mean, there's good stuff happening all around. There's robotics. There's a lot of different sorting devices for the e-commerce. I think one of the big advancements that we've seen in recent years is that there's a lot of what I guess would be termed digital freight forwarders today. You've seen it on the trucking side. You've seen some on the international side, and I think what I view is that in order to be a healthy company, you have to have a good balance of capacity, international network and footprint, and then technology. You have to have really top of the line technology to keep track and trace everything. Everyone wants to know where their packages are all the time. So I think there's some really cool stuff happening on that front. You still see little pockets like where it's not live track and trace, right? Like maybe if it's in a terminal in Asia or a terminal in the US where it kind of, there's not full live time track and trace, but I think we're moving into direction that's going to be, where you're going to know where everything is all the time here pretty soon, which I think is a very cool place to be.
All right, Michael, you mentioned China. We can't talk about international trade without speaking of the trade war and the tariffs that have been put on over the last couple of years. How have those events impacted international logistics, and what are your expectations for the next administration?
Right. I think it's a great question, and there's a lot of things out there. The trade war and the tariff situation began to have an impact, I guess, about 2 years ago. You started to see a lot of shippers try and shift around their supply chains a little bit, maybe sourcing from Southeast Asia or other origins to kind of work their way around some of these tariffs and impacts. But you haven't seen that done on a very large scale yet. And I think there was a lot of uncertainty about, a possible change in administration that has happened. And I think we'll have to see how that plays out in 2021. Are those, tariffs and trade wars going to kind of, rest? And I think one of the most interesting things, Andrew, is really the TPP agreement that was signed this week. And that was an agreement that everyone's been talking about for a few years. Obviously, the U.S. backed out of it. But there could be opportunity for us to maybe get back in that or do something else. So I think we have to watch those items and just see how they play out here in 2021. At the end of the day, someone's paying for those tariffs that were imposed through the increased 301 tariffs. So what I've seen is a lot of it's been passed down to the USA consumer, and I don't think that was the intended method. I think it was more to maybe shift those supply chains a little bit more, but that really hasn't played out in full effect just yet.
No doubt, Michael. Thanks for all the great insights today, my man. Everybody that wants more updates, more logistics updates, stay tuned for FreightWaves for all the latest. We come out with these all the time. You guys stay tuned and enjoy.